my childhood memories in the country of Laos. I was a little girl when my dad decided to move the family, to Thailand because, during that time the communists were taking over the country, and I know very little. I basically had to interview my own dad to kind of get a sense of what life was like for him, and for him to orally tell me, what happened during that time, how were we involved, how he was involved in the war, and what made him, decide to make that decision that it was time to flee the country of Laos and to go to Thailand. And I do know that in 1962, my family lived in the city called Mung Sing. I was born in the city called Hua Kong, and I'm not sure where my brothers and sisters were born in, but in 1962, that's where my family lived, in the village. According to my dad, it wasn't until the communists started coming into that city that my dad took, our entire family and flee to a city called Nam Kaeng, which is close to the border of Laos and Thailand. And so during that time, my dad was in a training that was put by the American CIA there. It was a trainer to train, some of the Mien people there, and he was one of those that was chosen to train to become a teacher, to train to become a trainer. And so it took about a year or two for him to be certified as a trainer, and he began to train the local Mien men on how to fight. And so how to use the weapons and how, what to do when you're on the front line. And so that was his job. And so when the communists took over somewhere between I think it was 1975, 75, when, that secret war was happening in the country of Laos. And when the communists started taking over, and he, looked like, the U.S. is pulling out of Laos, he again made the decision to take my family and to cross the border of the Mekong and to go to the camps in Thailand. And so we traveled to the city of Hue Sai and pay some people to take us across the border. And his description during that time was so horrific that, some people were not able to get on boats to travel across the river to Thailand. Some people swam, some people got in the boat, and there were firings going on, and people drowned, relatives drowned. And so before we crossed the river, my uncle, my father's younger brother, already made it to the camps of Thailand, and that he was in Sing Kong, Camp Sing Kong, and we sent word over to him that we were going to cross, and so he met us over at the other side, and from there took us to the camps. And we were at the camp about a year, according to my dad, and he didn't like the situation that was at the camp, and he met a Frenchman there, and at that time that Frenchman was also in the country of Laos. I don't know what he was doing there, my dad didn't elaborate, but he too during that time of war fled over to Thailand, and he met the Frenchman in the camp, and he started inquiring about how he wanted to get out of the camp and go to the United States. So the Frenchman began to tell him about his experiences in the United States, and he said, if you get a chance to leave, you should leave and go to the US. It's a really good country, and you want to go there. And so my dad then took the initiative to visit the office in the camp where there were U.S. agents, people stationed in the camps, and he inquired about getting out of the camp and moving to, resettling into the United States. And they've of course questioned him about, if he was talking about how he was involved in the war and how he played his role in the war and what he did and how he worked with the CIA agents in training men to fight. They said, well, do you have any proof And so he said yes. So he went home back to where, where they're staying in the camps, and pulled out a picture, an old black and white picture. I would say somewhere, 4x7 picture, something like that. And he showed him who he was on the picture, and there on the side of the picture were, if I can remember, I've seen that picture a few times, about 3 CIA agents standing on the side of the picture. And he said, I worked with these people. I was one of the trainers. And without a doubt, the agents at the camp did not question him anymore because he had the proof already. And he said he wants to go to the United States, and they told him, well, in 2 weeks, there will be a bus pulling up to the camp. You need to get on that bus with your family and go. And so he did. He took us on the bus and boarded the bus, and it took my family to Bangkok. And from there, he said that Father Park, a Catholic pastor, greeted us and asked if we wanted to be resettled in the city of Portland, Oregon. And of course, my dad said yes and moved us to Portland, Oregon, and that's where our life started in the United States. I remember arriving at the airport, of course, frightened to death with how big the airport was. And I kind of remember bits and pieces, people greeting us there. Of course, we had on our shaggy little clothes from the camp, and we were all looking around. And I know that my brother and sister were so young that they can't remember everything, but I think from there we went to, Father Park's place. They found us a home to stay in, and my dad said that our first house was the house that Father Park found for our family. They, kind of taught us things on what to do, and they watched over us and took care of us. And then soon after, we moved into a 3-story home, actually. And I remember sharing that home with another family. So I began to ask my dad, who was that family? And he said that was Kao Chim Chow's family. And I said, there was another Mien family, with us. Then he goes, yes. And soon I learned that my family was the second Mien family to resettled in the United States. Kao Chim's family was resettled in Michigan. And I asked my dad, I said, well, how did you find out that there was another Mien family in, the United States? And he said, well, writing back and forth to the camps in Thailand, he was in correspondence with relatives still there. He asked he heard that there was another family that resettled in the United States, and he wanted to know who it was. And so relatives found out the name of the gentleman and his family and where they resettled, and then my telephone number, actually, they got a telephone number. So my dad called Kao Chim's family and corresponded through phone, and Kao Chim's sponsors arranged for 2 flights, himself and his mom, to fly to Portland, Oregon to visit us. And soon after that, Kao Chim's mom did not want to leave. And so Kao Chim then flew back and then brought his whole entire family over to Portland, Oregon, and we lived in this 3-story home with lots of kids and adults in the family. I do remember that very well, on Sandy Boulevard in Northeast Portland. I went to school for the very first time, Hearst Elementary School. Big, huge brick building. One of the biggest schools I think I've ever seen in my entire life. And of course I was a young little girl, so everything looked big for me. And I wasn't there long. I don't remember much. I do remember popcorn parties and students and teachers. I do remember my sister, the one next to me, going to school for the very first time. But it wasn't that school that I went to. They had to bus her from the school to another school. And I remember her getting on the bus, and she was just crying in tears because she didn't want to leave me, and I couldn't go with her. And I tried to assure her that everything would be okay, that they're going to bring her back, and I'll be here to get her, and then we would walk home. And I think we weren't there long. I think probably 1 or 2 years, maybe less. We finally moved to a huge apartment complex called Halsey Square. And that would be the complex where dozens of Mien people started arriving in the late 70s and early 80s to that area to live. And so we found an apartment there, and Kao Chim's family was not too far from us. I began school at Charles Rice Elementary School, small little school compared to, Hearst Elementary School. And I was put in first grade. And it was frightening. I remember meeting my teacher for the first time, and she was a wonderful teacher. And then she just took upon herself to really get to know me. There was a huge language barrier. I couldn't talk to her. She couldn't talk to me. My parents didn't understand a single word she was trying to say. So there were a lot of gestures going on and a lot of smiling going on. But I knew that I was comfortable with her. And so what really kind of started me building the confidence and knowing that school is where I should belong and that I need to learn how to read and write was when Mrs. Jensen, my first grade teacher, put me in a girl, it's almost similar to a Girl Scouts, but it's called Bluebirds. And so got my Bluebird costume, went to the function, did many fun activities with the girls. And it's because of that outgoingness with the girls, I learned to, do very well in my English skills. And so I was very grateful for her. And then went to second grade after that. I wasn't there long in first grade. Maybe I came during school, maybe half the year when I entered that particular class. And when I started in second grade, I had Mrs. Lawrence. Mrs. Lawrence was, to me, she was a very tall lady, skinny lady, but she didn't know how to work with me. I still had a language barrier, still learning English. All I can remember is that she put me way in the back of the class. I sat way in the back of the class, not doing much, just kind of sitting there and maybe doodling on something on, a paper. But I didn't do much as compared to when I was in Mrs. Jensen's class, where she's very involved in trying to get to know me and trying to help me. Mrs. Lawrence, on the other hand, was quite different. So my experiences at Charles Rice Elementary School was pretty interesting, because when more and more Southeast Asian students started arriving to that school, I remember Mrs. Campbell, who was the principal at that time, they didn't have a plan, I should say, on what to do with the influx of Southeast Asian students. I know that they did started having an ESL class, and one of the teachers was, teaching that class, and she basically used me to kind of interpret for the other kids, because I've been there for a few years already, and so I've acquired enough, English skills to be able to communicate, between her and the students, and so that was my beginning experience from 1976 to, I would say, 78, I think, 77, 78, when I started Charles Rice Elementary School, to about 1980, we moved away from Northeast Portland area to more of the suburb areas in the southwest of Portland. So during the move, during their time at, let me kind of go back. I remember when we were living at the 3-story home on Sandy Boulevard, I remember they had a hard time, there were medications that they had to take. There were tests that they had to do, like for example, doing stool samples to check for different types of tests. And I remember my parents trying to figure out what to do. The parents, 4 adults, and trying to figure out how to read a piece of paper and follow the directions. And everything was unfamiliar. Everything was pretty new. They pretty much figured out what the toilet was for, what the refrigerator was for. And so it was tough for them. I can, pretty much see that they had to struggle through some of these, things that they have to learn. But they managed. By the time we moved to Halsey Square, we had our own apartment, so we weren't living with Kao Chim's family anymore. And so again, they started to take ESL classes at the adult schools. I remember this one lady that would come and just check on us and take my mom and dad to the grocery stores and, trying to teach them the different fruits and the different vegetables, because of course there wasn't any Southeast Asian food or shop at that time. And so trying to learn, what an apple is and what a pear is, and the vegetables that were there. And so taking them on shopping trips and buying things for them, learning how to use food stamps was something that was, strange to them, because back in Laos, money was a scarcity, something that you normally don't have, because you bargain, trade things with other villagers that live by, or with other family members and things like that. And so learning how to use food stamps and learning how to buy things was something that they had to learn. And so going to classes was something that they needed to do, because they needed to pick up some English language and skills to be able to communicate. And so, and then going to conferences with teachers was another huge obstacle, because I remember sitting in the classroom with Mrs. Jensen, and here's Mom not understanding anything that Mrs. Jensen said. All she did was just nod, 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 nod. And of course, that was my first year, and I didn't really know what Mrs. Jensen wanted, I couldn't, translate or interpret for her. It was just one of those things that as a little girl, you just kind of go, oh, well, shrug your shoulder, and I was just playing in the classroom as, the teacher was trying to get to know my mom and trying to show her things. And school was different, because, my dad wasn't one of the child in the family that got to go to school. His 2 younger brothers went to school. And so it was new to us. Parent involvement was new. We didn't, they don't know what parent involvement was all about or what it comprised. And so all they knew is just to take us to school and pick us up from school. And pretty much we learned as kids the value of school. And I think it wasn't until later on, when we were older and when we got into probably middle school, that we learned about how you need to keep on studying and what college is all about. And so it's more, we did the work in finding out what we needed to do to be successful here in this country, and what kind of schooling that we needed to do beyond high school. And so for them, they couldn't help us with homework. Because they couldn't read, basic math they couldn't do. I know that we had to figure out homework by ourselves and try to do the best that we could. I tried to help my siblings growing up, and so it was a huge struggle, but we managed to kind of overcome a lot of obstacles that came our way. As an adolescent, we moved the 3rd time. It was the 3rd time that we moved. We moved to the suburbs, southwest of Portland. And so I started maybe 5th and 6th grade at the elementary school, and then moving on to the junior high school. It was difficult. My parents were still learning English. There's some things that they can understand, some things that they couldn't understand. We grew up in an area where diversity was not you don't see diversity. It was, you know, a couple families. My uncle was across the street from us, and then there was us, and then Kauchim's family was across the street from us. It was a cul-de-sac of 3 Mien families living there, supporting each other, you know, with needs and whatever that we try and encounter. I think growing up, junior high school, you know, we faced a lot of things. We faced racism. You know, for the first time in my life, I faced racism by a kid that I went to school with who taunted us, followed us home from school, just said some things that kind of made us wonder, because he would say, go back to China, and then we're like, well, we're not from China. And so, you know, just did things that we were kind of, you know, it puzzled us a little bit, because we grew up with Christian families, Caucasians. They were very supportive, very nice. And then when growing up as a teenager, we saw another side, you know, that we were in shock about. Well, at least I was shocked to see that something like this could happen to us. We had our homes egged, both of our uncles' home egged, and so we didn't understand. We just kind of ignored it. And so it's those kinds of things that we slowly learned, that in this country there are some people that are nice and some people that are quite mean and would do things to you that you don't understand. And so we tried explaining that to our parents. You know, it's not that we are troublemakers, because our parents would say, are you guys troublemakers? Did you say or do something at school that caused these kids to, you know, be mean and things like that? And we go, no, you know, we go to school, we come home together as a group. It's just, you know, people who are not familiar with us as a group, you know, anything that's different or out of the ordinary, I think, you know, children or even adults sometimes don't know how to handle it in a way that's courteous and respectful, I guess. But junior high school was a struggle because academic became quite difficult and hard. And I remember being in geometry and being in my English class. The writing got tough, math got tough, but yet, you know, no one at home can help. And so it was just all on your own. You had to take the initiative to find help. So you would either have to inquire about who could, you know, you go to at the junior high school to get tutoring, or if your friends could tutor you or anything like that. But most of the time it was learning all the concepts and skills by yourself and just really sitting down and hitting the books. And so learning how to, you know, build good study habits, learning how to look at pictures and bold titles to kind of figure out, you know, what the book was trying to teach you, the questions or the concepts. And so my parents couldn't help us. And again, my dad was, you know, forcing himself to go back to adult school and learning English. And I remember my dad just kind of frustrated and said, here, do my homework. And so I said, Dad, we can't do your homework. You know, you won't be learning anything if we did it for you. And so that was something that he just didn't really get into, but he had a good job, and that's what he was proud of and kind of focused his life on. So did my mom. They both worked for Tektronix, and so it was just an assembly of little, you know, computer parts that they put together on the motherboard, and then it just passes on to the next person, and they do their part and pass it on. And so they've worked there for a very long time, and so they're very proud of themselves. And we don't, as children, we don't bother our parents because, you know, we know not to. It's that respect thing, and they do what they need to do, and we need to do what we need to do, because school is something that's not their strong point, so we have to figure it out ourselves. School, well, I began to start searching for colleges when I was junior high school in Portland was 7th and 8th grade. and then high school, it was 9th through 12th. And so in my 8th grade year, just kind of looking at the different colleges, because kids talk and they're oh, what college would you like to go? And here I'm going, what is a college? What do you do in college? I thought you would just graduate from high school and that would be it, but of course not. You could extend your education, go on to higher education. So I didn't know that, and so it was the beginning of an inquiry of what college was like. And it wasn't until when I got into high school, when I went to Hillsborough High School, I met my, I think it was my social studies teacher, and we began to have a good relationship. We were very comfortable, and I started asking him about, what is college, and and he started sharing me, telling me about state universities and universities, within the state of Oregon, and then how it's, all over the United States. You can go anywhere as long as, you're able to get in. And so I started asking, well, what do you need to do? What do I need to do to get into college? And so we talked about GPA, the courses that you needed to take to get yourself on the right, track. And so from then on, when I started choosing my classes and my electives, I was very conscious about how it needs to be, aligned with the state university or the university in Oregon. And so by the time I was a junior in high school, kids were already talking about the colleges that they wanted to go, and the application process. And I took it upon myself to go visit the counselor and asked about how do you apply and the fees and things like that. And towards the end of my junior year in high school, I met my husband. And so we corresponded back and forth. He came back and visit, and at that time, I was 17 years old, and he, I don't know if it was fate or destiny, but we knew that somehow we belong with each other. And so by my senior year, his family have already asked my hand in marriage. And so I left my family and came to California in 1988 and established residency here, so that the plan was to establish residency so that I could apply for the universities here. And so we stayed together. I lived with his family, and that's when I really began to research the universities here. And he graduated a year or two before me. He went to Cal Berkeley. And so after I graduated, we had our wedding, our traditional wedding. And then I soon started applying for different places, and I too got accepted to University of California, Berkeley. We had one semester together before he left and graduated, and then I spent the next 3.5 years there studying, there, which was a great experience also. So everything was pretty much, left for me to figure out, on what I needed to do to get myself ahead and on the right track. And I think that people along the way, teachers that I could name throughout my education that kind of got involved in my life. So, and that's made a huge difference. Throughout in elementary school, I can name teachers in elementary school, teachers in junior high school, and teachers in high school that all kind of work with me to kind of get to where I need to go. I think as an educator, from my experiences growing up, and my teachers that were involved in my life, I think for a teacher, it's very important to get to know your students, their backgrounds. I think it's really, you'd be amazed by some of the stories that kids tell you. Maybe not the primary grades, because they might not have a sense of, even today, if you ask kids in the elementary school, like I've done, I have a few Mien kids at my school. They're not, I mean, they're biracial, you know. They know very little about their culture or their background. But when you get into the junior high and the high schools, I think it's important. Yes, you see, you know, about 100 students a day, you know, because of the different periods that you have to teach. But as an educator, you know, they're knowing your population of students is really important, because what happens is that for a lot of the Hmong and the Mien and other ethnic groups that come from Laos, we're sort of lumped into this huge category of Asians. And not a lot of people completely understand or know the history of why the Hmong and the Miens came to the US. And so that's why I think that when you sit down and kind of ask your students, you know, what nationality are you, or what ethnic group are you, they are willing to share, or some of them might be astonished that you're even asking the question, you know, and they'll take the time to say, well, I'm Hmong or I'm Mien, and then if you say, tell me something about yourself, then I'm sure they will take the time to say, well, this is my story. And I think it's very important to kind of know the stories of your students and where they come from. I think cultural competency and cultural sensitivity is really important in the classrooms, and really important in, you know, your campus. Knowing where your children are coming from, and you know, being knowledgeable of their background, of their experiences and their history is something that is, you know, I think that all educators can learn something about from different backgrounds. And for me, as a teacher, I remember I learned a lot about the Hispanic and African American students where I taught. You know, I know a lot about the Southeast Asians and, you know, where they came from, but when I taught at a Title I school, the Hispanics have their stories to tell. The African Americans have their stories to tell, and it's just about educating yourself with that knowledge so that you're better equipped on how to work with parents, work with, you know, teachers or community-based organizations, things like that. As an administrator now in the district, you have the responsibility, I think, and this is just, you know, my personal feeling about it, that as an administrator, and not just as teachers too, but we also need to know who our teachers are. You know, sometimes we're not aware that, oh my goodness, so-and-so is a Mien teacher, or so-and-so is a Hmong teacher, and they have their stories to tell. And getting to know your staff and their background, getting to know all of the students in your site, on your site, and just being out there visible, greeting yourself and say, hey, you know, I'm so-and-so, I'm the vice principal, nice to meet you, you know, inquire about who they are and find out more information about them. I think that, you know, when you do that, people are more, you know, able to approach you and talk to you and come to you for any issues and problems. Because a lot of times I know that even when I was a teacher, my Mien parents and, you know, are very hesitant to come to me for help. And it's because I think that they think that I might hinder their kids in learning English because I speak the primary language. And I said, here's, you know, by talking to them personally, you share how you're going to support the child, you know, in the classroom. And I think primary language does help in some way, but, you know, at least, you know, when you're trying to convey a concept, then if they don't understand it in English, then you're going to say it in your primary language. And kids have this, you know, light bulb that kind of just lights up, and they can make those connections. And I think that, you know, that's what I look for, is to be able to be out there visible and to really make sure that I, you know, talk to and greet parents and say, you know, come to me, you know, my door's open. Any issues and concerns, I I'm available to talk to you. And I think that for a lot of Asians who have the mentality that I'm just going to bring my child to school and you're responsible for my kids and I'll just pick my kids up right after school, the concept of parent involvement, the concept that you can take initiative, if there's a concern that you can go to any of the administrators to talk about it. And I want them to be, feel comfortable enough to approach me to say, may I talk to you? And it doesn't matter if it's in my primary language or in English. I will, because a lot of them are afraid that because their English is not strong, they don't want to waste my time to come and talk to me. And I said, but you're welcome to talk in Mien. I can sit down and have a heart-to-heart talk with you in our primary language to see how I can support you. And I think that's really important, is to reach out to those parents, because some of those parents are very hesitant, to want to bother anybody regarding their issues and concerns. These interviews are a great resource and tool for teachers, and I think for students as well, for the Mien students and for the Hmong students to kind of really hear, wow, our stories are being told by individuals. It's being put out there for people to really get a deep sense of why we're here and the struggles and the experiences that we are going through. And I think as teachers bring this into their curriculum or embedded into their curriculum, that it validates students, who they are and where they come from. And they, a lot of times, especially Asian kids, they're very timid and shy. And they normally don't, speak or participate as much as other kids. And so bringing this sort of tool into the classroom, they can relate and connect to. And I think that's really important, is that connection that they get, and they can probably open up and start sharing. And I hope that the high schools, the secondary, students realize that it's important to begin to share now your story or your parents' story, and maybe even start the process of really sitting down, because a lot of these kids now who have been in the school system for so long really have no idea where, what their parents or grandparents have gone through in this war and why they are here. And hopefully it will start this wave or inquiry by many students in the secondary level to just say, I am going to start interviewing my grandma, my grandfather, my mom, my dad, and I'm going to start to learn my history. And, and then I think that that's the hope that I would like to see happen, is that students begin to, dig deep into their history and start asking and interviewing some important people in their family, and hopefully get a sense of, whether it be on video or in writing, to have something kind of in record or document so that they can also share with their kids in the future. Because I think it's important to keep passing, those oral histories and experiences down the line, so that, our children could have those experiences. And who knows, somebody could write a book about it, and more and more books about experiences where we have more resources and tools to connect and relate to. So I think that's important. And I hope that teachers, when this is done, that there's some way to communicate with the district that we're finished with this project. Well, we've been working on this project. We've interviewed many, many individuals within the community, something that you can incorporate in studios, social science, and feel free to click on and watch these videos and see how your grade level or your team can use it as part of your curriculum. I think that's the hope that I would like, and I for you as well, and people who are involved in this project, is to really use this to their benefit, for teaching and learning. The airplane, and how the small TV monitor pulls down, and boom, cartoons started appearing on the screen. We're all like, wow, I was, I don't know about my brothers and sister because they were so young. I was like, wow, TV, TV for the first time, and it was cartoons, and I was just focused on that screen for the entire duration of the trip, and because there were other movies that were being showed, but the cartoons were just so fascinating for me that, when we finally got a TV, when we moved into our house, I just remember all the cartoons that I've watched and remember, until this day, Tom and Jerry, oh, Tom and Jerry, the Pink Panther, things like that. Just kind of, brings back all those memories of, my first time experience with the TV. Illnesses that my siblings and I had. We had, I don't know what they call it back then, but our head was just filled with all these scabs. Our hair had to be shaved, and we had to soak ourselves into, these baking soda baths for hours because we were itching like crazy. And so the food and stuff that we were not used to, my parents were just having diarrhea problems and not being able to eat the food, and they lost so much weight. Things like that were just some of the other struggles that I remember my mom and dad going through. Especially my dad, he was just very sick, the first couple years that we, came to the U.S. All these other, problems with bowel problems, and just eating, not being able to eat the kind of food that was available to us. And so those kinds of things. I mean, it scared me one time. I thought that my dad was not going to make it because he was just having so many issues with the stomach that it was hard to maintain food, and he didn't eat. So he didn't eat very much. Neither did my mom. And so it was, for kids like us, it's rarely, a little bit easier than it is for adults, but it was very hard for them, very hard for them. I remember my uncle, we sponsored my brothers, my dad's two younger brothers. We were eating boxes of, we don't know what it was, but my uncle then later, like 10 plus years later, 20 years later, said, we didn't know what we were eating, but now we knew that we were eating dog biscuits at that time because we couldn't read the label on the box. We didn't understand what it was for. And so when he said that to me 20-something years later, I was like, oh my goodness. And I said, well, that's the experience that we went through. Luckily nobody got really seriously ill, but that's the kind of things that, a lot of people, went through. And I heard many other horrible stories about not knowing how to turn the furnace off and the gas stove, and left it on burning, and someone had a pot of water and didn't know how to turn off the stove, the gas stove, and it kept filling the pot with more water and more water because until the sponsors came and showed them how to turn off the burner, and but in the meantime they just kept filling the pot with water so that it wouldn't burn. Things like that. So a lot of people faced many, and we happen to talk about it a lot sometimes over social media, is bringing stories like that up, and we chuckle at it now, but at that time it was quite the experience for the adults and kids at that time. So